Hello, and welcome to another adventure in Western Washington history. If you enjoy this type of content, make sure to subscribe to the channel. And if you watch this and get something useful out of it, please give the video a like. To give the full history of Fort Nisqually, we need to do a little backstory, so bear with me. The Hudsons Bay Company finished Fort Vancouver in 1825. Chief trader Archibald MacDonald and Hudsons Bay President George Simpson arrived in Fort Vancouver in 1828 from the York Factory. York Factory was Hudsons Bay's headquarters on Hudsons Bay. They made items there as well as shipped to England and to other parts of the world. Archibald was promoted to factor, or head, of Fort Langley later in 1828. Fort Langley, British Columbia, was built in 1827, 2 years after Fort Vancouver. Originally built near present-day Derby, it was moved in 1839 and rebuilt 2.5 miles away where the historical site is today in Langley. In 1832, Archibald and a group of 8 or 9 employees left Fort Vancouver for Fort Langley, the one that was in Derby. They arrived at the mouth of Nisqually Creek near modern-day DuPont. Today it is a 140-mile drive that is straight down I-5. You can be sure the path was not so straight then. It would take a month of steady traveling to make the trip from Fort Vancouver to Fort Langley. Archibald and his crew camped there for 12 days. Right above the beach, they built a 15 by 20 or 300 square foot log storehouse called Nisqually House to store the supplies that they brought. Archibald left 3 men at Nisqually House and continued on to Fort Langley. He returned about a year later to set up a trading post at the site. The men who had been left there had made a garden and some things were already growing. The ship Vancouver brought supplies soon after and filled the storehouse. That afternoon they started trading for furs. The word got out that there was a new walled fort in the neighborhood, and natives came from all around to see the new store. Dr. William Tolmie first arrived at Fort Vancouver in 1833. He was soon told he would be leaving for Fort McLaughlin near present-day Bella Bella, British Columbia. He stopped at Fort Nisqually, which was being built at the time, and was held over for 6 months tending to Pierre Charles, a Hudsons Bay employee who had injured himself with an axe. Later in 1833, Archibald MacDonald was sent to Fort Colville to take over that fort. Fort Colville, near present-day Kettle Falls, was opened in 1825, the same as Fort Vancouver. One thing I recently uncovered that should have been in the video of Fort Vancouver is that Hudsons Bay men who married native women, or as the HBC put it, married after the fashion of the country, were made to let HBC save 10% of their wages to go to the native wife and children they would leave when they left back to their homeland. Of course, some never left, like John McLaughlin. He also had a native wife seen here. Okay, where were we? Francis Heron had been factor at Fort Colville and was transferred to Fort Nisqually when Archibald was transferred to Fort Colville. I did not look into why, but Francis Heron was unhappy with his new post. Heron felt the fort was not in the right place. He scouted the area for what he felt would be a better location. Heron, after returning, decided to move the entire fort to the Deschutes River at Tumwater. After transporting all their supplies and merchandise there, the natives refused to go past the first fort, so they moved the entire fort back to the DuPont location. The fort, being about halfway between Fort Vancouver and Fort Langley, made it a good location for fur traders trading their goods as well as safety of those in the area. There was not only timber, but a large prairie to graze animals and make a garden. John McLaughlin, head or factor of Fort Vancouver, in an effort to help the British claim over the area, in 1937 talked some retired HBC employees into settling the area about a mile downriver from present-day Toledo, Washington, on a prairie near an area that would be known later as Cowlitz Landing. As time went on, the whole area would be dotted with farms, and Fort Nisqually would take on more of a supermarket or a modern mall role in the area, still trading furs but also doing agriculture on a large scale. In 1838, HBC made a separate company to handle the food production side of things. They called it the Puget Sound Agricultural Company. They would supply food to the forts as well as Russia and Hawaii, or the Sandwich Islands as they were then called. Fort Nisqually would be the head of this operation, but those in control were HBC and Fort Vancouver. John McLaughlin ordered the fort moved in 1838. The new site was 1 mile inland and took 5 years to complete. Dr. Tolmie having taken leave, some say due to personal beliefs that the missionaries should not force the natives to adopt their religion, was back at Fort Vancouver in 1843. Dr. Tolmie was sent to Fort Nisqually soon after arriving at Fort Vancouver. It was told to John McLaughlin that Dr. Tolmie had extensive knowledge in farming from books he'd read, so he was sent to Fort Nisqually to run the Puget Sound's agricultural company, a position he was not happy with. He felt that promotions would come from HBC and not from within Puget Sound Agricultural Company. In 1847, he was promoted to chief trader of Fort Nisqually. In the late 1840s, they built many roads to get to the different farms and sheep stations. They used oxen and two-wheeled carts to transport the product back to Fort Nisqually. Some of these roads are still used today throughout Pierce County and on the Army base Fort Lewis, as well as the Air Force base McChord. There were 3,180 cattle and 8,312 sheep in 1848, but by 1851 there was 6,000 cattle and 10,000 sheep. 1846, a treaty between Great Britain and the United States was made, and it put the border of British-owned land at the 49th parallel, where the border of Canada is today. Fort Nisqually was now on American soil. The HBC was allowed to continue business. Dr. Tolmie was promoted in 1855 to chief factor, or head of Fort Nisqually. 4 oak trees were planted in front of the chief factor's house in 1858. If you stop at the information kiosk on Center Drive in DuPont and look out, you can see those trees still. Dr. Tolmie leaves Fort Nisqually for Fort Victoria in 1859. Edward Huggins replaced him, but was never officially made chief factor. The U.S. government bought the HBC out in 1869, and the fort officially closed in 1870. Edward Huggins and his family stayed and homesteaded the site. In 1906, Huggins sold the farm to the DuPont Powder Works. DuPont built a dynamite factory and a town for its employees. The original site of Fort Nisqually is protected and owned by a nonprofit. 2 surviving buildings, the granary and the factor's house, were moved to Point Defiance Park in Tacoma in 1934. Fort Nisqually was completely rebuilt at Point Defiance and can be seen today. Please, as I say in a lot of videos, stop by there, check the place out. People and their interest in history is what keeps it all alive. Thank you for spending time with us as we took another journey into the past. Let me know in the comments what you think of this video, good or bad. Also, any memories you have visiting the old site in DuPont or the new site at Point Defiance. Until next time, remember, what you do today will be history tomorrow.